Of course, the more senior you get, particularly in a company like that, the bigger the decisions, the bigger the knocks, the tougher the situations you find yourself leading. So 100% like resilience. Resilience matters. Particularly in those final years, I've always been, maybe sometimes to my detriment, but really focused on fairness, integrity, honesty, doing the right things. And I think those things have always mattered to me. 100%. And that, do you know what? The art of saying no is, I think, the same as not throwing the ball up.
Yes.
Right? I'm not even going to go there. No. Yeah.
Welcome to A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up, the podcast. My name's Sam, and I am incredibly excited to have Catherine Crump from Wired Consulting here today. Catherine, welcome. Let me do a quick intro and tell you a little bit about Catherine. So she's the Managing Director of Wired's consulting business, and her life experience has spanned roles from large organisations to small startups across a wide spectrum of sectors, and I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more about that today and her journey. In her role, she engages with the world's leading thinkers, academics, business leaders, entrepreneurs, on topics ranging from AI to climate tech. She has an absolute passion for championing innovation, supporting entrepreneurship and empowering women and making a positive impact in the world. So Catherine, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Sam, thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to kick off with a really broad question around kind of your journey to adulthood. So tell me a little bit about that journey as you got yourself into the world of being an adult.
Yeah, wow, big question. So I think I had a pretty unusual start to adulthood in that on my 18th birthday, I woke up in hospital. The first thing that I legally signed, so this recognition I could sign things for myself, was in fact a document saying that my appendix could be removed. So I spent day one as an adult in hospital, and I'm pleased to say adulthood got better after that. But I actually missed quite a lot of school because of that. It's my A-level year. And I don't think I ever really thought about the impact that could and would have on the rest of my life. I'm sure we'll come back to that as we dig in. But long story short, I did a microbiology degree, which I absolutely loved, up in Leeds. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I think like many people, saw an advert on the wall of my teaching areas which said, would you like to come and teach English in Japan? And I thought, why not? That sounds pretty amazing. So off I went with no knowledge of Japanese to a country that was completely unfamiliar to me. Spent a year there, which was life-changing in so many fantastic ways. Met people while I was there who broadened my horizons, which I think until then had been pretty narrow. That inspired me to think about maybe coming back, looking at business, like this thing called business that I'd never really explored or thought about. Got on a grad scheme with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their consulting division. Spent a few years there. Went to Mars in a client-facing role. So again, two big companies to begin with. And then mid-20s, probably mid to late 20s, decided that maybe these big corporate companies, they were great, but, I was this tiny cog in these massive wheels. Could I make more of a difference somewhere? And somebody mentioned this small startup to me, which I had lots of advice, mostly from my dad, don't use it, don't join a startup, it's too risky. And I did. I spent 15 years there. I worked my way through the company. I spent my last 3 years as CEO. Again, we'll come back to that. And then at the end of that tenure, I was sent a job spec for Wired, a brand that I just loved. And that was 5 years ago. And that is where I am now.
Amazing. So that must have been that's quite a baptism of fire into becoming an adult. I mean, that is unique. I've done quite a few of these now. That's definitely a unique, this is what happened when I turned 18. Yeah. How did you handle that? Like missing school, and it must have had quite a big impact on you.
Oh, do you know it did? But as I say, I just didn't realise. I went to a really nice school. I loved school, but it was a local state school. It was really traditional. I have very traditional parents. My dad was a civil servant. My mum was a housewife. And I think the word that was missing from my life in those days was aspirations, right? So when I when I missed all that time from school, I remember just the rhetoric kind of being, you'll be fine. You're a bright girl, Catherine, you'll be absolutely fine. And me thinking, yeah, okay, I'll be fine. To get to do this degree I wanted, I didn't need amazing A-levels. So I don't think I ever worried about not having amazing A-levels. I just, being fine was okay to aim for, right? And it's only really in retrospect, and when I think about like where my kids are now, being fine was not really the right goal there. Like, I still needed to aim high. Because when we start to think about perhaps some of the challenges that then led me to face later down the line, I think doors that I'd always assumed would be open, jobs, grad schemes, the first job, those doors were shut, right? Because despite being a bright person, my A-levels were fine. And I think that actually ended up with me having to pull out stops to make myself stand out. It's forced me to work a lot harder, probably instilled a work ethic in me just a few years later at university that I'd maybe never had before, when I realised, you know, this Catherine on paper at that point wasn't enough, right? It wasn't the Catherine that I wanted to have on a piece of paper. So yeah, that weird start, I think, actually set me back in those early days of life, in a way that I hadn't realised in the moment.
Yeah. So what was that light bulb at university that made you think, oh, actually, I'm going to have to smash this if I want to get to
great question. It's really, really simple answer, actually. It literally was the first job. So I remember getting into that probably the start of the final year and applying for probably, I don't know, 100 jobs. Like, what could I do at the end? And I didn't even get an interview. I didn't get a response. I didn't get an interview. I got absolutely nowhere. And I had a friendship group, many of whom had been to great schools, you know, not the local state school, many of whom had amazing A-levels. And I saw them going to the job interviews, and these were not happening for me. And I just found a gear that I didn't know I had in myself. And I knew that if I wanted those doors to open, I was going to have to work harder to open them. And as I say, I think that was a hard early lesson, and I think it's actually one that put me in really good stead.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And then going into such a massive firm like PwC and navigating it versus the startup, that must have been, you know, PwC to Mars to a startup. Like, how did you manage that transition? Because that's a really interesting shift. Like, as your dad said, oh, startup, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. And actually, again, it's funny, isn't it? When you look back at the order in which your career goes, I think that was super beneficial for me, because particularly as a grad, you know, when you join these big companies, and certainly in those days, grad schemes taught you everything. Like, I had all the training under the sun on everything from how to write a PowerPoint, how to negotiate, how to sell, how to behave, how to ask questions. Really powerful, useful information. But when you are this tiny cog in a massive wheel, you don't often get to use that training, right? You've got all these brilliant skills, but you don't use them because you're the one like doing the really sort of lower level roles in those days. And so when I joined this small startup, which I think at the time there was probably about 10 people, suddenly I had all these skills. And I could really help all of those people who were in a startup that couldn't afford training, you know, where you learnt on the job, where you were thrown in the deep end and had to find a way to do it. And again, I think without realising that the order of those roles really put me in a great situation to help others, to stand out, to make a difference. And I think that is, again, why I stayed there kind of for so long and went onwards and upwards.
Yeah. And I guess that resilience you learnt at university when you realised and you had your light bulb really comes into its own when you work in a startup, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I think it's just given me this really insightful understanding of life as an entrepreneur. And I should say it was never my business, but I loved the company, and I feel like I cared about it to the extent that I always acted almost as if it was, and I poured my heart and soul into it. And of course, the more senior you get, particularly in a company like that, the bigger the decisions, the bigger the knocks, the tougher the situations you find yourself leading. So 100% like resilience. Resilience matters, particularly in those final years. So when I ended up when I was offered the CEO role, I mean, it's kind of crazy when I look back at it now. I was just come back from maternity leave. I had a 1-year-old, I had a 3-year-old, and I came back to this company that I absolutely loved. That was actually having a challenging time financially. Like, it was a difficult time. And I remember being offered this opportunity and saying to my husband, okay, it's probably going to keep me pretty busy. What does this mean for how we work? What does it mean for our childcare? And he was brilliant. He was like, look, Catherine, go for it. And I did. I really went for it. And I had the best of times. I learned so much. I realised like the breadth of a CEO role is unlike anything else. The roller coaster of the CEO role is unlike anything else. And yeah, I think I built more resilience than at any other point in my career. But yeah, absolutely amazing journey.
I think what's really interesting from that is most women tell the stories that when they take time out and they have children, it negatively impacts their career, right? But you came back with a 1-year-old and got offered a CEO job.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be surprising. I shouldn't be saying that like it's a surprise, but a lot of women's stories that I hear, the opposite is true.
Yeah, and to be fair, the founder of the company, and there were 2 founders, there was one that was still around at that point, was female. And in a small company with a female founder, I think that was a great help. And
yeah.
I also think in a smaller company, when you leave, your presence can often be very heavily missed. Yeah. And so I think, the gap was then obvious. And
yes.
yeah, no, it was absolutely brilliant to come back and be given that opportunity. But yes, the timing, if I could have picked a different time of my life, I think I probably would have done. That's not how the world goes.
No, indeed. So thinking back, so you think of that journey that brought you to Wired and what you do now. And if I think back to what you're saying about your 18-year-old self, you possibly wasn't very driven. You maybe didn't have that aspiration and inspiration, for want of a better word, especially not when you were lying in hospital on your 18th birthday. If your 18-year-old self could see you now, what would they recognise? What would they say, yes, I can see that. I had that when now?
Yeah. Ooh. That's such a good question. I actually feel like my personality, so my core character traits, I think I'd absolutely recognise. I've always been, maybe sometimes to my detriment, but really focused on fairness, integrity, honesty, doing the right things. And I think those things have always mattered to me. I like to think I've always had a reasonable amount of common sense. I've been pretty sensible. Now, the flip side of that, of course, it means I'm not a massive risk taker. Like, I'll take a risk, but never like an unmeasured risk. So I'm never going to be a world-changing entrepreneur because I don't have the risk kind of radar to take those kind of leaps. But I'd be the person that would help that world-changing entrepreneur get where they need to be. So I think I'd recognise that. It's interesting, actually. I think I did have drive. I think I had drive to do what I was doing as well as I could. But I don't think I had the role models, almost like the vision of the world to realise like where that drive might take me. So I wasn't channeling it into anything. But yeah, I think I get those core things. On the downside, I think I'm a bit stubborn. Sometimes that serves me well, sometimes it doesn't. I'm quite competitive. I think probably is those kind of core values and personality traits probably haven't changed that much.
Brilliant. That's amazing. So Catherine, I asked you about kind of what your 18-year-old would recognise. What would she be absolutely blown away by? Like, what would she be amazed by?
I think my 18-year-old self would probably be stunned by quite a lot, actually. And it probably is back to having that kind of really narrow field of view and just not realizing where I might be able to go. You know, this narrow view of the world and what my place in it could be. I think that my 18-year-old self would be stunned by the roles I've held, the things I've done, the stages I've been on, you know, the audiences that have been in front of me. And I think that the people I've met, and you know, 18-year-old self, so I'm giving away an age here, but 1996, right? 1996, that was the year of the Euro semi-finals where we got through. I remember watching that. So I was sitting with my 18-year-old friends watching the Euro semi-finals. And I remember as clearly as anything, because I was quite into football then, I remember Gareth Southgate missing his penalty, right? And we were all devastated. I think, you know, people of my age, we remember that moment. I remember the music that played at the end. And if someone had said to me in that moment, you know, Catherine, in 25 years' time, you and Gareth, you're going to be sitting in a room, you're going to be recording a video. You're then going to go and have breakfast with him where you'll be facilitating with a group of C-suite business leaders. I wouldn't have known what C-suite was. And you and Gareth are going to have a great conversation. I think I would have laughed you out of the room. But that is in fact what happened. And and he was a wonderful man.
That sounds like a whole other story for a whole other podcast. So we may have to come back to that. But I think we do amaze ourselves, right? I think we always, you think when you're 18, I think most of us don't really, and some people, you know, the Stephen Bartletts of the world have already started their second business and, you know, but I think most of us are still trying to work out who we are, let alone what we're going to do with our lives and what we could achieve. We've touched a bit on kind of, you know, you really kind of knuckling down at university and that really making a difference. Are there any particular struggles that you have had either growing up or as an adult that really truly made you who you are? You touched on the fact that fairness and honesty is really important to you. Is there something particular that is driving that, or is it just inherent?
I think it probably is inherent. I think you know, without going into details, I think across myself and my family, I think we probably suffered a few bereavements quite early. Mm-hmm. And moments like that definitely make you realise that life is short. And of course, that doesn't always change your behaviour every day, right? Because you've still got to do the things you've got to do. You've got to go to work, you know, you've got to do the jobs. But I think it has made me make some decisions differently, particularly someone who's not a natural risk taker. Mm-hmm. I think there are things that I might not have done that when the thought in my mind goes, Catherine, life's short, you know, this person probably would have done this, then that has, I think those things have made me think differently. I think, to be honest, like probably the biggest struggle, certainly in the last 5 years, I feel as though, you know, running a company with those two small kids in a time when there wasn't much money around, that was really hard.
So Catherine, if I can go back to the bereavements that you mentioned, can you tell me about how that formed you?
Yeah, so there's certainly, you know, one bereavement that for me was life-changing, and it was back in 2008. One of my very best friends, amazing athletic lady, she was at the Olympic Games, and she fell off a mountain while trekking, like total freak accident. And it's things like that, I mean, they upend your life, right? She was a lawyer, she was sporty, she had everything going for her. And I think as a result of that horrendous moment, well, in my life and all our lives, it made me approach some things really, really differently. A really big one there is actually my husband, my personal life. My husband is 4 years older than me. He was actually one of my line reports at that moment in time. And, you know, I remember thinking at the time, we had a great relationship, but that moment in time made me make different choices. I had a voice in my head saying, Catherine, life's short, live a bit. And were it not for that, this tiny silver lining of this ridiculous cloud is that I have the, big silver lining, really. I have the life I have. So yeah, moments like that gave me this inner voice that was just like, Catherine, come on, live a bit. And for someone who doesn't like to take risks, that was, I think, a small positive outcome of a really tough situation.
I think that measured risk taking is such an important piece. And I think, having also suffered bereavement in my life, it's those moments, and you lose them through time, right? But in those moments, you really do go, but anything could happen. So I might as well just throw myself at some things and see what happens.
It's interesting, actually. I feel like if I think of the other sort of point in my life where I was really struggling, there was a point where I was running a company. There wasn't much money in the bank. I was really worried about how I was going to pay the workforce. And I was immensely stressed. And I remember I don't get stressed, by the way, very easily, which I think has probably served me in good stead, but I was immensely stressed. I remember trying to order a cup of coffee, and I was so stressed, I literally couldn't speak. And when you're like, there is definitely a problem here. Anyway, left but trying to buy the coffee. And horrendously, again, that was sort of one of the other bereavements in my life. For whatever reason, I found out about it through the BBC News, of all reasons. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I am so stressed about, a company, which is important, but I'm alive and I'm here. And this is not the end of the world. And again, big things like that reset you. And that reset me as a human. And I was able to deal with that because it was in a different compartment at that point. Yeah.
So we've talked about perspective. Tell me about the best decision you've ever made.
I think the best decision I ever made was applying to that year in Japan, with no idea really what I was getting myself into. Again, big thing for a non-risk taker, but deciding to do something that for me at that point in my life was completely different. Again, small view of world, homogenous group of friends, really safe up until then. And I think that changed me more than anything else that I have done or has happened to me in my life, because of course this was pre-mobile phones. So I was the other side of the world as a 21-year-old. Everybody I knew really was asleep when I was awake. So all decisions were mine. There was nobody there to say, what should I do here? What do you think about this? I didn't even speak the language. I lived in rural Japan, where even the train boards were written in kanji. So I couldn't even read where I was trying to get to. And what that did for my independence, my understanding of me, like my, that inner voice we all have, that person we talk to, that was the only person I had to talk to most of the time. So I feel like I got to know myself really, really well. So without a shadow of a doubt, I think that set me up for a really different path going forwards, and gave me so much time to think about maybe like who I could be and what might be out there, and all these things I'd never even had time to think about before. So yeah, that would be it.
I'm so glad we came back to that, because we kind of glossed over that at the beginning. You're like, yeah, so I did this, I did that. And then I went to Japan to teach for a year, and then we just carried on. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. That's quite a big thing. So what triggered you to just go, yeah, why not? Let's go do it. For someone a self-confessed not big risk taker, which I'm not sure is actually a fair description of you given this conversation. But
maybe it's not. What triggered it? What triggered it? Well, I always thought, back to aspirations and careers, I always thought maybe I want to be a teacher. Maybe I'd want to be a biology teacher. So obviously, microbiology degree. So this was teaching. So that was one tick. It was teaching. I had a few other friends who had also applied to do the programme. It's basically a programme where the Japanese government sends like 500 people a year from US, UK, Australia. It still runs. It is brilliant. So I had a few friends applying, which again, probably for me, took out some of the risk. A couple of them got it, but actually they were not in the same part of Japan as me. So that ended up being kind of neither here nor there. yeah, what can I say? I saw a poster, and maybe I am a risk taker after all.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to take not a risk taker out of your bio. I think
Measured
for
risk,
everything you've
measured
done.
risk.
Measured risk is the best kind. So we all get given advice. And part of the point of this podcast is to understand kind of what advice is useful to, potentially our younger selves. But we've all been given advice that we don't take. So what I wanted to ask you was, what's the best piece of advice you've been given that you completely ignored?
Oh, I feel like I'm given this piece of advice every now and again, right? So it's not just that I've ignored this once. I think I've ignored this too many times. And I'm trying to think of like the best phrasing.
Yeah.
But it's sort of ask for more, right? Be a bit cheeky. So what do I mean by that? It's I probably, even to my younger self, asking for the pay rise, something that we know women often doesn't come naturally. You feel a bit rude, which is nuts, right? But asking for the pay rise, asking for the upgrade, asking for the freebie, right? Like pushing for the cheeky request, pushing for the favours. I am rubbish at that. And it probably comes from this like really kind of polite upbringing, which means that you don't push. And I think I had a moment 2 years ago where it just hit me again that by not doing this, in some ways I absolutely hold myself back. And that moment was, I had the pleasure of interviewing Marcia Kilgore, actually as part of an HSBC event. And Marcia Kilgore, for anybody who doesn't know, she is a serial entrepreneur. She has run and exited 5 businesses, including household brands. Beauty Pie is her current brand, Fit Flop. And she is this powerhouse of energy and risk-taking. And one of the questions I asked her was, Marcia, you're on the cover of Time magazine. Like, how did you do that? And this was quite early in her career. And her answer was, I asked.
Wow.
She said she'd been interviewed for an article in the magazine. And as part of that, asked them who was going to be on the front cover. And they said they hadn't decided yet. And again, me in that role, I'd have gone, oh, great, good luck. Marcia asked. She said, can you put me on the cover? And they said yes. Right. And that for me, like when you meet those, again, like standout entrepreneurs, they push, they ask, and it's not cheeky. I think it's just this extra level of drive. So for me, that is the best piece of advice that I still need to get better at taking.
Excellent. So I think I need to ask you to ask Marcia to come on this, because she sounds like she'd be amazing.
Oh, she would be amazing. Yeah, she'd be amazing.
Brilliant. So now we're at the final question I ask absolutely everybody. And the point of the podcast, obviously, the beginner's guide is to get those nuggets. And I think that ask for more is a really good nugget. I'm going to force you to find me another one that you followed.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the one thing that you would put in the beginner's guide to being a grown-up?
Okay. This is probably something I have grappled with for a long time. But my one thing would be, you cannot juggle everything as well as you want to all the time. Okay? And it's taken me a while to reconcile myself with that. Okay? Now that doesn't mean I have to drop things, which is also a really important point. I have to decide which ball not to put in the air, right? And I think it's often this great myth, particularly once you have kids, yeah, you can juggle everything. And in my view, you can't, and that's okay, right? But what ball are you not going to throw up? And I always think I have 4 things really that I can choose, right? What's going up and what's not. And that's, it's work, it's friends, it's family, and it's me. And I can't have all of those going 100% all the time. And I just have to decide which of those I'm going to prioritise, maybe for the next 2 weeks, maybe for the next 12 months, right? And which of those I'm going to just keep a bit lower for a while. That would be, I wish I'd thought about it that way sooner, rather than thinking I had to do it all the time and get it right.
I love that. This is what I love about this podcast, because everybody gives such different answers. But But what I love is it's that spin on, you know, you're going to drop some balls, but it's not that. It's choose which ones you throw in the first place, and actually taking that power back of not having to worry about which ball and which plate is up, but actually going, do you know what, that one's just going to have to stay down here. I'm not even going to play with it.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And do you know what? One of the things I could have said in response to that question is around don't feel like you have to say yes to everything. Or this is probably your advice piece as well. Like, people in my career at various times have said, you know, Catherine, try saying yes to everything. And maybe when I was 25 and I didn't have that many other commitments, maybe, but gosh, that would have killed me after a while. And so that would also probably be I don't even know if it's a good piece of advice, but it's not.
I think the art of saying no is a skill. Absolutely is a skill.
Yes, I love that. Yes,
it's not one I'm very good at, but it's definitely a skill.
Yeah, 100%. And that, do you know what? The art of saying no is, I think, the same as not throwing the ball up.
Yes.
Right? I'm not even going to go there. No. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Catherine, thank you so much. I've so enjoyed interviewing you today, learning a little bit more about you, your Japan experience, you know, how you met your husband and taking that bereavement and really powering something good in your life. And I think those are the nuggets of life that people are really interested in, and how we all manage through life with the ups and the downs, I think is so interesting and is absolutely the purpose of this podcast. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated it, and I know the listeners are going to love it.
Oh, thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up. If you enjoyed it, please like, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If there's someone who inspires you that you'd like me to interview, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram and TikTok. In the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.